How many of you have dealt with hardware, JavaScript or otherwise? Arduino, Raspberry Pi, awesome. All right, so we've got a mixed crowd here. I'm going to talk about how JavaScript is quickly taking over the physical world and how you can participate and how easy it is actually to get started. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a UI engineer at Retailing Not. We're the coupon site. Yeah, there's some swag in the back. Feel free to take some so I don't have to take it home. And yeah, definitely an interesting place to work. So I'm also a JavaScript instructor for Girl Develop at Austin. What that is a national nonprofit that teaches girl-friendly courses and encourages women to get into jobs and development by teaching introductory courses at a low cost. And then I am an unrepentant JavaScript addict. I enjoy JavaScript, Node, just about any framework you can throw at me, I'll at least give it a try. And yeah. So, as most of us know, in 1995, JavaScript was born, and Brendan Eich created it in 10 days at Netscape. He's now at Mozilla. And at first it was kind of a toy language. Most people considered it kind of trivial. It certainly wasn't necessary to make your web page work. It really just made your buttons look funny, and it gave you websites like this. If you can't read that awesome font, that is the red Turbo Rangers homepage. Awesome. So it gave us sites like this, where JavaScript didn't really make the page work, it just made the page look awesome. So scroll forward to 2005. So this is a 10-year span before Ajax. It's kind of mind-boggling to me that there was a 10-year span before we had Ajax, and this really made JavaScript take off in the browser. It gave us the ability to write web apps that communicated with the server and actually did things to make your website work. It wasn't just a trivial thing anymore. So in 2009, everything changed. Everything completely changed. And I mean, you can argue that with me at the Esquire if you disagree, but I stand to this day saying 2009 changed everything for JavaScript with the advent of Node.js. To be fair, I was a skeptic. The first time I heard about Node, I go, no, JavaScript on the server, but it's a browser language. Why would you want it on the server? It took me a couple weeks to figure out why that was so awesome. It wasn't just that JavaScript was on the server. It really pulled together what became the JavaScript community. Not only did Node developers band together, but front-end web developers started to realize the value of their JavaScript and started to band together as well. I found 2009 as like an explosive font of open source. GitHub really, really started to take off. And open source everywhere just started to take off with new JavaScript frameworks and plugins and pieces of code flying around everywhere. And V8 actually is definitely a big part of that JavaScript renaissance. It made JavaScript performant. And that's a key to the JavaScript community being able to take off and say, hey, look, this language is viable, this language is not a toy, and this language isn't slow. So, like I said, the community really started to take shape here. So in 2010, an event happened that kind of, in hindsight, changed a lot of things, but at the time really didn't seem terribly vocal. It was the advent of Node serial port. Chris Williams wrote this module. He's the guy who runs all the JS conferences. He's a fantastic person if you've never met him. He's hilarious and extremely smart. And he wrote Node serial port, and it allows Node to communicate through the serial port with physical devices. It was still really difficult to use if you didn't already know a lot about hardware, so it kind of was very quiet for a while. Well, Node serial port was getting better and better. In 2011, Mozilla announced Boot to Gecko, which eventually became Firefox OS. What's fantastic about this phone OS is you write apps for it in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It isn't like PhoneGap, and it isn't like Titanium Accelerator. You're not writing this code and then putting it into a web view, or writing JavaScript and compiling it out on the phone code. You are actually writing applications in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is fantastic. So my first demo I've actually been running the entire time. This is a Firefox OS developer preview phone, and on it is an app. That app is a Reveal.js remote. I can go backward, I can go forward, and if I go to a slide with notes, you can see all my notes on the phone. Now what I really like about the Firefox OS app is I was able to do this really easily. So I'm going to exit presenter view real quick. trackpad. Oh, of course. Just that. All right. All right. So, there you go. Okay, so this is the same code that I was showing you on the phone. I did nothing to change this code, and it's running in the browser. I did absolutely nothing. I just statically served my app into my browser. And actually, I have it plugged in. So if I, let's see the slide I was on. So demo time, previous. So that's what I find amazing. I've written a phone app that I can immediately just turn around, statically serve, and I also have it served on my Android device, so it works in mobile, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. And it's got all these, it's write once, work everywhere, is kind of like the whole Java mantra, but I'm kind of stealing it for JavaScript at this point, because we can now write JavaScript directly to the phone. Also, the code's available on GitHub. The URL's up there, but if you want to talk to me afterward, I can also give it to you. So 2012, the year everything changed again. So remember Node serial port and how it kind of opened up quietly and it wasn't that big of a deal? Well, in 2012, Rick Waldron wrote a module called Johnny 5. And what Johnny 5 does is it uses Node serial port to allow Node to communicate with Arduino devices without having to write any C code. You're only writing JavaScript and you can control Arduino boards. Fantastic, it's amazing, it's great. So you can write your Arduino sketches in JavaScript. There are a couple of caveats. You have to remain tethered to your USB port for now. Someone has apparently written a Bluetooth module adapter. I haven't found that code, but when I do, I'm gonna make sure it's more available because I like that code too. So my next demo, oh, actually, amazing GIF, and then next demo. So if you'll go to this IP address on your phone or any browser with WebSockets, so not IE, you go to that IP and then port here, I'll zoom in a little so you can see. And then you should see a form with 3 inputs and a button. There's technically form validation on there, but it kind of ignores it. Use numerical or hex values for each input. So 0 to 255 or 00 to FF. And then watch the bottom. Once somebody, oh, here, I'll hold it up since there's like, so what this is doing is it's going through the colors you guys are submitting in order and showing it on these 2 LEDs. Because I've got this Arduino board connected to a Node server. And the Node server is communicating directly with the Arduino board. And you should see the queue of colors also showing up. Actually, I have the here. Aha, see, I can see your queue up here too. And well, I think I need to restart the server, of course. Of course, I practice this over and over again, and then when I try to live show it. Go ahead and refresh the page, everybody. Once this reboots. And all my tabs are rearranged. Fantastic. Don't you just love it? Okay. Okay, now it's cycling. It should continue to cycle. Yes, okay, it is. Okay, so you can see it starting on this LED, moving to that LED, and then moving off the queue. So that's entirely Node. I wrote no C for this. It's all JavaScript. Drop it. I'm not going to drop it. And then I'm going to go back to my slides. So there's even more, actually, cool stuff happening in the JS taking over the world scenario. In 2012 and 2013, tiny, cheap, ARM-based computers became widely available. There's 2 models that are the most popular, but there's several different models on the market now. One of the most popular is the Raspberry Pi. It has an ARM processor, onboard flash, RAM and ROM, SD card persistent storage, and GPIO pins. See, well, the problem was Node didn't work on ARM processors for about 5 minutes. And then someone fixed Node to work on ARM processors about 5 seconds after the first person got a hold of a Raspberry Pi. So you can now install Node on your Raspberry Pi. You now have a tiny little web server written in JavaScript. So, okay. And you have access to GPIO pins, much like Johnny 5. So if you wanted to run an embedded system and not be tethered to a machine, you could use the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. There is, of course, an NPM module for that. So, You have Node running on the actual machine. You have access to the GPU. A lot of the common uses for Raspberry Pis are remote Wi-Fi attached sensors. I know a bunch of people who have built weather systems for their home. They put it on their porch. It tells them the temperature, the humidity. One of them tells the wind speed through a really weird Rube Goldberg style contraption. And it's fantastic because it just connects to the web. He doesn't have to go plug it in. He doesn't have to push a button. He just goes to an IP and there's his weather information. There's a lot of people making movable robots with Raspberry Pi that you have to rig up specialized power systems for that because motors require more power than the Raspberry Pi can put out. But one last common use is a media center, which I find kind of weird. There's not a lot of RAM on Raspberry Pi, so I don't quite get how the video is going through that well, but I haven't tried it, so I can't say whether it works or not. The other very popular version is the BeagleBone Black. Now, I actually prefer this one a little bit for a couple different reasons. One, the Raspberry Pi does not have any analog pins, it only has digital pins. The difference is a digital pin can only output 1 or 0. So if you've got an LED, you can only have all the brightness or none of the brightness, or red, green, or blue, or not, or nothing, or only those sets. Whereas with an analog pin, you can go anywhere between 0 and 255. So if you've got a sensor, you want an analog pin because you want to be able to do a range of things, sense a range of humidity or temperature, whatever you want to sense. Same with output. For these RGB LEDs, I required analog pins because that's how you give it a 255 value or a hex value when it gets the right color. So the other reasons I like the BeagleBone Black are it has Cloud9. If you've ever heard of it, it's a JavaScript IDE written in JavaScript. Awesome. It's free and open source, so if you Google it and you like it, you can download it and run a private instance on your computer, and ta-da, you've got a new editor. It also has a native JS library called BoneScript that BeagleBone Black does. And what that means is, again, you can run native JS code to control GPIO pins, and it makes it a lot easier to do so. So I have one last demo, and that's with this little BeagleBone. I can never say that 5 times in a day. The board setup. And what I've got loaded here is the Cloud9 IDE. It's actually on the board. I didn't have to install anything on my machine. It's all on there. It's kind of neat. It was actually really easy to set up. And so what I've got here is fade.js. I'm going to zoom in a little. And so basically I'm telling it P813. So it's talking about the side. So that's 9 and that's 8. And then pin 13, if you count, there's like 6 little rows of 2. And then I've got 1 in there. So that's 13 of row 8. And then I'm configuring it to be an output pin because I'm going to use it to power an LED. And then set interval of fade to 10. That's BoneScript saying, okay, I'm going to make this LED fade every 10 cycles. And then, yeah, and then here's the fade algorithm, which someone else wrote. It's fantastic. I just borrowed it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit run. And if my wiring didn't fall apart in the car, yes, awesome. All right, I have, it's not nearly as impressive as the Arduino, but I've only had this for a couple days. It was fading. Oh, there it goes. Okay, hold on, it will fade again. Aha! All right, so what's cool about all the robots on this table, written only JavaScript, nothing else. No C, no nothing, just JavaScript. For, well, HTML and CSS for the Firefox OS, but other than that, all web technology is that way. So, and what's really fantastic is I don't have time to go over all of the cool things you can do with JavaScript right now. Not even in the future, right now. You can fly, if you've ever seen the little 4-bladed helicopter, the drones that fly through the air, you can control those with Node. It's fantastic. I've had to do it once. It's ridiculously easy. They're also ridiculously easy to crash, but they're really durable. So it's really great. You can do it completely in JavaScript. There was a joke that they wanted to do a taco delivery service using GPS data to fly a drone from one place to another with a taco, and they pretty much got it done. Basically, they were shut down as a public service by air traffic guidelines, but the fact that they got the code working, to me, is pretty miraculous. We had taco delivering copters at one point. I kind of wish I'd been in San Francisco at that time just to see it. Wireless node box, like I said, someone has gotten a Bluetooth adapter, I think. They've claimed it. I haven't found the code yet. I will find that code and I will make it more publicly available if I can. HTML callers, even without hardware, you can do some really, really cool things with JavaScript. HTML callers, distributed systems. Who here has used Git? Okay, if you've ever heard of Tim Caswell, he's a really cool guy. He lives out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And he's rewriting Git in JavaScript. You can use Git in the browser. And then for Node Knockout, he wrote an editor that directly uses Git with the Git implementation that he wrote in JavaScript. And it's actually fairly functional. You can push, pull, clone. It supports HTTPS, HTTP, and I think it supports the Git protocol. And it's all written in JavaScript. It's fantastic. It leads up to my main point. This is a great time to be a fan of JavaScript. We've got this amazing community of developers who are putting tons of time into things that no one will ever sell as a business. Nodecopters were just for fun. Firefox OS, yes, for a business, but it's also so financially accessible. These developer preview phones are $150, unlocked, no carrier. So, I mean, the Arduino kits cost about $80. If you want just the board, it's only $35. And BeagleBone, same thing, about $40, I think the board was. So, we've got an infinitely accessible JavaScript world available to us as developers. So it's a wonderful time to be a fan of JavaScript. Now, the question is, what can you do to contribute? Build something, anything. It could be hardware, it could be software, it could have been done before, it doesn't matter, build it. Build it, document it, and share it. That is the best thing you can do to help the community. Because inevitably, your weird project that you did in your backyard in half a Sunday is going to answer somebody else's very obscure question about code that relates to their work. That's kind of the beauty of code, is one project can answer questions for several other projects, and they can kind of just rebound forward. So write something, document it, and release it to the world, and you will be making the JavaScript community a much better place, because even though it's already awesome. So, yeah, that's it for me. One last irrelevant GIF and my contact information, and questions. Yes?
So with things like Nodecopter, have we seen, if we're writing JavaScript to execute these, performance-wise, is there any degradation versus using Arduino, in C straight up, or what are the issues with that?
So Johnny 5 uses a messaging protocol. That's why it has to remain tethered to the PC or the computer. So yes, there's a tiny bit of lag there sometimes, and like I had to reset the server. There are some catches there. And with Nodecopters, there's a little bit of lag because it goes through Wi-Fi. So much like my WebSockets remote, it communicates over whatever Wi-Fi you're on. So when I did Nodecopters, there were 20 people doing Nodecopters. So we kind of agreed to kind of go in turns so that the Wi-Fi wouldn't degrade to the point that we had severe amounts of lag. So there are definitely catches to using JavaScript for hardware. With BeagleBone, no, because it is part of the system, and they've done a really good job of making sure it's performant. With Raspberry Pi, your limitation is your amount of RAM and your processor. But you shouldn't be doing anything too processor intensive with JavaScript anyway. So it kind of solves that problem itself. Any other questions?
What are you going to do next?
I do next?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm probably going to finish refining this remote because it's got a decent UI, but I want it a little better. And I'm going to actually put up an installer button on the GitHub repo because the cool things about Firefox OS apps, you can put an installer button anywhere. It doesn't have to be through an app store. So I'm probably going to do that next. And then hardware-wise, I'm working on a system that will turn on RGB LED lights all over my apartment when I get home. So like when my phone connects to my Wi-Fi network, when I get close enough to my apartment, I want all the lights to turn on and scare the living crap out of my cats. So. Oh, and an automatic cat toy, of course, because they're getting out of shape. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you say, what are your thoughts on the Tessel?
I like the Tessel. It's a little expensive, so I'm kind of, I haven't bought one. I did get an Arduino, which is kind of like the Tessel without the modules. And an Arduino is kind of an Arduino with native JavaScript. So it's like Johnny 5 without the tether and without the message passing, which is also awesome. We're getting an actual native Arduino board with JavaScript. Yeah. If I don't seem excited enough, I think I need to implement it. Yes, Tessel's good. A little expensive for my taste, but that's, it looks like a great beginner tool, and it looks like a great thing for schools. Any other questions? I will be at the Esquire, and I will be happy to talk about all sorts of things from frameworks to hardware to. Thank you very much.